Hi guys, my name is Patrick Hendrick. I'm a freelance football commentator and conference interpreter, and welcome to my channel if you're new here. This is the place where I give an insight into working as a language professional and also operating within the football industry. And if you're lucky, I might be able to also offer you some tips, tricks and techniques when it comes to learning a foreign language. Speaking of which, today I wanted to touch upon how you go about choosing which foreign language is best to learn, the best foreign tongue suited to your needs. This is a very difficult decision, but also an exciting one. Difficult, why? Because there are so many different languages to choose from. You are spoilt for choice. But exciting? Well, that's because it's a very enriching, rewarding experience when done properly. And if you really get to grips with a language and you really develop the passion for that language, it can become a lifelong commitment, a lifelong endeavor. So, without further ado, how do you go about choosing a foreign language? Which one do you select? There are so many out there. Well, unless you have a situation whereby the language almost chooses you, and what I mean by that is, let's take, for example, you have a Brazilian partner and you want to learn Portuguese so that you can better communicate with your in-laws, or you want to get to grips with the culture, or you spend a lot of time traveling to Brazil to see your other half's family and friends, then clearly it's become a no-brainer you learn Portuguese because it's the most useful, most obvious language for you to learn, and it serves a certain purpose. It fills a need that you have in your life. But if you're not in that situation, then ultimately it comes down to choice. Do you do it out of practicality? Do you choose the most logical language to choose? Or would you go for something which is more similar perhaps to the languages you already speak? Most recently, I learnt Portuguese. I decided to go for that language because I already spoke French and Italian, but I could have easily chosen Danish. Why did I choose Portuguese? Because I wanted to learn a foreign language that was part of the same linguistic family. I already spoke 2 Romance languages, and I knew that with Portuguese, I would have a slightly more accessible route into learning the language with cognates, so words which are very similar to words that I already knew in French and Italian, for instance, and also similarities between the grammar and the syntax and the word order and so on and so forth. Danish would have been a slightly tougher nut to crack for me. Perhaps it would have been even more rewarding, but I think it would have been more time consuming and it would not have necessarily suited my needs. And what I wanted was to be able to learn a language. I wanted to get some tangible momentum, some tangible results. I wanted to get some traction with the language so that then I would feel good about myself, I would feel self-confident, and I'd be more likely to persevere with it, to continue, because like anything, motivation comes really from getting results and seeing that tangible progress. So I think it's important, if you already speak a foreign language and you want to learn another one, then maybe try and choose something from a similar linguistic family. If you already speak German, then why not opt for Dutch? If you already speak Swedish, then maybe go for Norwegian. And this doesn't only go for language professionals. I'll take the example of a school friend of mine who did German A-level, so those are the examinations you do when you're 17 and 18 in the UK. He left German to one side for many years, tried to come back to it on the basis that he had learned some German many years before, but ultimately he gave it up and has since pivoted to Spanish. Why? Because he discovered that he liked doing some charity work in a Spanish-speaking country, and therefore he wanted to get to know the people that he was working with a lot better, and in order to do that, the language was really the gateway to build those connections, to build those relationships. So once again, a tangible need. You see that there's something there that you wish to do. I also have a friend who is a language service professional. He works as a translator and interpreter, working with Italian and Spanish. He recently told me that he's decided to try and learn French, but in quite an informal way by working on this website called italki, doing some conversation classes without necessarily the formal structure of lessons or grammar. He just wants to try and get a sense for the language. And he's able to do that with French because he already speaks Italian and Spanish. So with these Romance languages, it's almost like you've got 1, 2, or 3, or even 4 corners of the same square. I certainly felt that when I was learning Portuguese. I've occasionally joked in the odd moment of false modesty that I'm not necessarily very good at learning languages. I simply learn languages from the same family, which again is logical. Romance languages, I learned French, so Italian came easily. I learned Italian, so Portuguese came recently. And this calls to mind what a colleague said on Twitter recently with regards to Czech and Slovak. It's the same reason why I know of more than one colleague that worked with Russian, and yet they wanted to add an EU language, so they were then able to transition into Bulgarian, which is relatively similar to Russian and gave them a good grounding in the language, and again, just allowed them to shorten that process. What advice would I give? Well, clearly, if you already speak a foreign language and you want to learn another one, try and choose a language which is very similar to the one you already speak, a sister language from the same linguistic family. This will allow you to generate that positive momentum and really make that snowball effect so you can get progress, you can get traction, you can get a lot of positive feedback, you can learn to love the language, and you can really kick on from there. But if you haven't necessarily learned a foreign language already, then try and think what might be the most accessible language for you. If there's a language which is synonymous with a certain style of music that you love, or maybe you absolutely love Romanian films, then why not opt for Romanian, because you know that your passion and your interests are aligned to the language you want to speak. You really take pleasure and enjoyment from watching Romanian films, so you know you're much more likely to go that extra mile to not only watch the Romanian films with English subtitles, but also maybe look up certain words and start to learn Romanian more formally, so that one day you can then watch those Romanian films without the need and the crutch of the English subtitles. Speaking of the power of having an interest, that's something I touched upon in a previous video. I spoke about really harnessing, or leveraging as the Americans would say, the power of an interest, in this case football. So really using that passion for football to enhance your language learning experience. And I'd like to thank the suggestions of those that said they use football or Championship Manager as its predecessor to really enhance their language learning experience. If they are going to play a video game for 2 or 3 hours at a time, then why not change the language of the game, so at least they're passively doing a bit of Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, whatever it may be, self-study in that time. I also really like the comment that I received about someone being fluent in racing driving, which meant that because they spoke German, they were also able to access Dutch reading materials, a magazine all about motor racing. Which brings me on to a couple of resources that I really like, a couple of new discoveries I've made, which are quite interesting in terms of linguistic innovation. They're essentially bilingual products. The first one is Paris Saint-Germain, who do their pre-match press conferences with the head coach, but before they actually get to the event, they do a pitchside studio presentation. So let's take the example of their away match at Barcelona the other night.
And here we are, pre-match, ahead of the press conferences with coach Mauricio Pochettino, with the player, the midfielder, Leandro Paredes, ahead of tomorrow night's last 16, first leg Champions League clash against FC Barcelona here in the Camp Nou.
Bonjour,
Hola.
Robbie Thompson. Hola, ¿qué tal?
Bien, bien.
Bon, on va rester français, anglais aujourd'hui. Bienvenue sur PSG Télé. Comme vous le devinez, ici, nous sommes au bord de la pelouse du Camp Nou, le fameux. Nous retrouvons la scène européenne.
So here they have Robbie Thompson, who's an Australian English native speaker, speaks fluent French. He's joined by Ambre Godillon, who's a French native speaker, also speaks English. And what's great is Robbie will speak in his native language here, English, and he will introduce a certain number of points. Ambre will then pick up on the points that he's made, so that the French viewers can have a summary of what's been said in English if they don't necessarily understand that language, and then she'll build on that and add a separate point to that, and then vice versa. It will go back to Robbie and he will do likewise. So quite a dynamic product that allows you to really follow along in both English and in French. Maybe you don't speak much French, but you're able to follow what's going on simply because you have the context of the interest in that football team, and you also have the context of what's been said before in one of the two languages that you understand. Similar to that Paris Saint-Germain video, there's also one I discovered recently, which is a Portuguese journalist who does an excellent podcast called Fever Pitch. This was very interesting because he hosted it in Portuguese, and yet his guest was Spanish, and they were talking about Italian football.
A Juventus nunca morre, e ontem, se estávamos a pôr em causa o Pirlo não ter a experiência do António Conte, ontem não se viu nada disso, e não sei se isto não pode ser aqui lançamento para o final da Série A e da luta muito grande que está a haver nos primeiros lugares. Bem-vindo, Juanjo.
Hola, buen día a todos. Obrigado por estar aquí otra vez, otra semana más. Una semana que hemos tenido de todo. Como dices, Joao, vamos a hablar ahora de la ida de la Copa de Italia.
Great for me because I'm really considering learning Spanish as my next linguistic endeavour, and this was fantastic because I obviously had Portuguese, which I understand. They were talking about an Italian match, which I'd actually commentated on, so I had the context very fresh in my mind, and therefore I was able to really get to grips with the Spanish. And once again, it's quite an encouraging experience because I know they're talking about football. I'm well aware of what the context is, so I'm able to glean a lot of the content and get the bulk of the information out of that, despite the fact I've never formally studied Spanish. So in conclusion, when it comes to choosing a language, I would suggest you make a sensible decision. If you already speak a language, then why not opt for one in the same language family? If you don't, then the world is your oyster, but perhaps you already have an inkling, a few clues as to which language you might be best suited to because you have an interest in Indian cooking, or you love Spanish films, or you are obsessed with Dutch horticulture. Whatever it may be, those interests are out there. Try and explore them and try and think which language will be best suited to meeting your interests and your hobbies and your needs. And hopefully you make the right choice, you continue with that language, you get tangible results, and it becomes a lifelong passion and endeavour, and it really enriches your life. I hope what I've said has been of some value. Let me know if you enjoyed this video by giving it a thumbs up. Even if you didn't enjoy it, maybe you're feeling charitable, like it nonetheless. Comment if you have anything to say about this, and subscribe, of course, if you haven't done already and you want to see more content from me. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers, guys.